Okay, good morning. Today I'm going to be doing a preview of an interview that I did with Geraldine Petit, who works at SUHO. Geraldine has been working with us for quite some time now, and she has really been one of the change makers in the industry, and this forms one of the first parts of a series of interviews that I'll do on some of the SUHO people so that people can get to know our staff and what we do, and the passion behind what we do as well. So please enjoy this video. You can get Green Star CPD points for this video, so follow the instructions that I've put in the chat. And also, if you want to email any questions or have any further discussions with us, you can email us also. So thank you very much for watching, and please enjoy. So welcome, Geraldine. Firstly, I'd just like to say it's been a pleasure working alongside you over the last few years, and you've certainly pushed the studio at SUHO to the next level of thinking on the 10-star home. And I'd like to touch on your experience in the industry, in high-performance housing in particular, but also as a woman in this field, the challenges and how you advocate for change in communication. But I thought, firstly, I thought you've got quite an extensive background overseas, in particular in Europe, with that beautiful French accent of yours. Can you tell me about your beginnings, like where you were born, where you studied, small excursions that might have related to your interests and things like that?
I was born in France, in Normandy, so this is the north of France, a quite cold and rainy area. And on a snowy day. And yeah, I just grew up there. My mother is a teacher, so I grew up with in a quite social diversity environment. And yeah, I don't know, I had really young, I just needed to be really creative and do a lot of artwork and things like that. So I think the way I went to architecture was quite naturally coming. I thought about doing Beaux-Arts, which is a art study, but I lacked space, really young, geometry and things like that. So I've been really lucky to grow up in an environment where people support my interest. And so I was, yeah, it just came like that really quickly. And yeah, so I left home, I was 17, so it was an early start because I couldn't study where I came from. So I went to Rome, Paris, and then ended up studying in Switzerland to finish my architecture studies. So I like traveling. I was happy about discovering new places. And I like living in new places. I'm not, like what I like in traveling is meeting new people and understand how they live and how they think differently than what I'm used to. So that's...
Yeah, I can very much relate to that. I remember walking through places like the Colosseum in Rome and just being absolutely inspired by things like material or the fact that this thing is still standing and there, and it lasted that test of time.
Yeah,
and then,
I think when you grow up in these kind of places, you're not really conscious about it, but you have to travel to actually make sense with it. Because it's part of the, yeah, it's part of the decor you grow up in. So, but yeah, traveling and studying everywhere and yeah, meeting new people give me a new sense of what I learned by just being there and growing there. Yeah, for sure.
And can you paint us a story of where you feel as a young person, when you started to be really aware of your passion for comfort and health and amenity for people that are inside buildings? Is there a particular thing that really spawned that? Maybe an experience in a really poor building, or you've met someone, or in your travels?
I think it's really come from a broad point of view. I used to study urban design and environmental matters at a big scale. And I think my interest just came from the fact that studying in Switzerland, we've got this perception of being really part of the environment. And I met some really amazing people during my study and read a lot of things when I did my master work about how we fit in, and how we're part of the place we are living in. So that's at a big scale, it's about the landscape and how things are organized around you to feed you, to comfort you, and things like that. Like Swiss people have a really big sense of, of, uh, of fitting in the environment and looking after it. And then slowly I get to a smaller scale and just realize that every big things you want to do, you have to start with what you do exactly around you. And so it's, I don't know if it's clear, but it's like people need to fit in where they are living and care about it. And so it's happened with the room you live in, the house you are in, the garden you look after, and in an extended way, the community you live with, and the streets, and the city, and the planet, you know. So I just like zoom back to the scale, and I do really deeply believe that everything you do at any scale has an impact, and you have to be, because it's empowered you.
Yes,
And
very much.
give you the possibility not like to be involved in and make changes. So yeah, it just comes from that. So a lot of research about environment, landscape, and also transition about the way people live and how we can help on the planet to recover from damage that has been done. So yeah.
You're
Yeah.
a keen gardener. Recently you had those seeds that you'd
Yes.
collected, which was wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
How do you, how do
yeah.
you hope that the landscape and plants and all of that come into buildings? Do you have a bit of a personal view about how people should make their spaces look? How they get that connection to the outside if they've got limited windows, limited light coming in?
Yeah, well, I think everything can be done, like from again small scale to big one. I used to live in an apartment in France, in Le Havre, and I was growing carrots on my balcony, you know, and like small carrots and things like that. So it's not so much about feeding you, right? But it's about like keeping the contact with the your abilities to produce your own food and life, because gardens is an amazing presence, and things to remember you that there is living everywhere around you. And I think it's really healthy to just put a little bit of energy every day in contemplating this. I think people can do that like on roofs. They can do that on inside of the house. The internal environment is also a place where you can grow and celebrate life, and they can do that on the windows. And if they've got a 1 square meters, they can do it. I think we should do that everywhere in the streets. I did my master work on urban agriculture, and I do believe that um, feeding ourselves and looking after the land is part of the community, the really strong community bond, and that should be present everywhere. So it's a link in between people and a link to her. So that's it. So I really like permaculture and different ways of organizing the living space as a whole perspective for it. Like the house is not just a place where you sleep. The house is a place where you celebrate life and you interact with your environment, and you also interact with the community. So yeah.
Yeah. In talking about the context of buildings, and I know it's dramatically different from what I've experienced between Australia and overseas in my travels as well. How do you think people can best make their buildings appropriate for the context? From what I know about your background, you've worked on a number of different interesting projects over the years. Can you describe the importance of some of these projects that you've done in terms of learning about context and creating buildings for context and the community? and maybe that street activation, because I know that that is done so much better overseas and Australia is so far behind Europe.
Yeah. So I do think it's a question of zooming back and forth for small scale to big one again. When I work on some project in France, I work on some housing trust project. So we had this, like, it's funny because in Europe we had this kind of progression that go reverse from what's happened here, where we had like this big apartment unit being built in the 70s, 80s, and now we go back to smaller scale buildings for living. And so I used to work on one of those townhouse projects in France, which is actually not a townhouse because it's actually to put in the countryside, but where we could offer individual houses for people with low income.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a really interesting project because, again, you look at the scale of the community. Those people don't have a lot of money. They kind of feel disconnected with the land and disconnected with the community too often. So it's about giving them again access to the ground, the possibility of producing their own food and living in a small area that doesn't cost them so much, but using not a lot of energy and feeling actually responsible for their consumption and things like that. So yeah, we work on this model of houses, row houses, and using really good insulation, really healthy and natural materials, and still working with a really small budget, which was really challenging, but that's where I learned a lot. So that's this connection in between the big scale, the community, and what's going to be affordable and available for everyone. That is, I think, the place where I learned the most. I also work on multi-use building, mixed-use building. And so one of the things that came out a lot the years I was working in and at the school too is like how to be flexible with buildings so that I can actually become like general shelters. Yes. And they can host different programs. So they actually answer the need, but in a long term. And so all this work about like, so you kind of separate the idea of sheltering and how to create a nice environment for living in, for working in, and the use of the building. So the building become really a prime shelter. And so that was a really interesting way to work that really came from reflection starting at school too, you know. I think I learned a lot of, there were a lot of starters from the place I was taught to with some really interesting teachers. But the experience I had, I'm really grateful for because I could actually really take this thought and beginning of reflection to a hand, to a building, to
all the way through.
All the way through, yeah.
Yeah, which is actually quite hard for a lot of people getting into architecture, and that those first few years you feel like you're not actually sinking your teeth into an entire project.
Yeah. Well, and it's easy to be brought into a lot of different things. Like there is a lot of pressure on the building industry, so it's require a lot of a lot of communal work and a lot of strength and a lot of confidence to sometimes be able to maintain your objective and really deliver something you trust in.
I kind of feel like where I know that you have started, 10, 15 years ago or more, is kind of where Australia is now. And I've been told in terms of looking at statistically that we're about 10 years behind the UK and places like Europe and Canada in terms of building performance and sustainability and accessibility, which you've touched on in terms of energy efficient housing. Can you describe any examples of where you have found this the most evident in Australian work that you've been involved in? So in terms of air tightness or the understanding or people having a misconception about it potentially?
Yeah. So obviously energy efficiency which is just one aspect of a sustainable building, right? But an important one is where I find the gap really alarming. Air tightness, like for example, is to consider how much building, like the average air tightness of building here in Australia is around 15 air change, or
Yeah,
I
the
don't
average. Yeah.
remember exactly, but
Yeah.
that's quite scary. And it's hacked a lot on the comfort, on the health of the building, and so on the health of occupants. So that I was really shocked about it, because this is something that has been considered for at least 20 years in Europe. Yeah, I think there is really some misconception in Australia about how important it is to be actually maintaining a comfortable environment in the house. Just the way you say it, comfortable, it's not just about comfort, it's healthy. It's creating a place where there is no cold winds and condensation, and a temperature that is reasonable in the average is acting a lot on the health of the inhabitants. So yeah, that's one of the big gap I saw. And also this idea about thermal bridging, like I think this is all about creating the right envelope, after all, to be able to shelter the people again. I think that aspect has been left down in Australia. They say there is some really interesting aspect that has been considered in the architecture here that still stand really well, about material and solar passive. There is a really good consideration. I can see that there is a big potential to work with that here. But this idea about the envelope is really far behind. And so, yeah, so mainly the work I've been doing with you guys and a little bit before when I work here was about trying to bring back to like a reasonable standard of construction in this way. And yeah, it's really, I mean, it's really interesting. There is a lot to do.
Yeah, there's a long way to go.
Yes.
Yeah. In terms of Passivhaus, and we know there's a bit of a disconnect between certain standards and Passivhaus and, you know, the star ratings and that here. So if I understand correctly, a lot of passive houses might perform around 7.5 stars, 8 stars generally, but then they have a higher level of air tightness. Can you describe the strategy regarding that and how that benefits the occupants in terms of the health inside of the building?
Yes. So when we speak about stars and performance, it's about simulation, right? So this is a predicted performance. So to be honest, I don't think this star rating is actually reflecting the real performance of building, because it doesn't include this construction aspect like air tightness and thermal bridging and all the work that can be done on the envelope and that need to be done on site, like with the membrane and so on. So yeah, so it's not performing really well in the Passivhaus standard, or it depends how it's designed with that. It's just because the criteria are different. There is a lot more emphasis in the star rating on solar passive aspects, on thermal mass, and so those aspects are a little bit in the Passivhaus standard, but they're not primary aspect, and the envelope is taking over it. So that's the reason why there is such a difference of a contrast of performance if you go from one certification to the other. Now, this said, I really do believe that certification is a kind of something that needs to drive the designers to improve their work, and the constructor too, the builders too. Now, yeah, I think both aspects are really important, and that's why we did this work on the 10 star, that the 10 star is actually performing really well and giving a really good simulation of energy use as it is. but there is nothing in the rating that gives you the confidence that those aspects, airtightness, thermal bridging, and so on, will be acknowledged. And so you can end up with a building that can perform this way, but maybe not comfortable and not don't achieve its best use and its best performance, just because the constructive aspects are not in. So I thought it was really important to actually consider this construction aspect, to give the chance to show also that a good performing house is a house that is built properly, considering those aspects that are more emphasis in that are emphasis in the Passivhaus certification. For me, it's not so much about having certification. It's like going forward, because this house is a pilot house, to show everything that can be set up to actually have comfortable and performing houses. And I'm really grateful we had the opportunity to do that. We could have done like a 10-star with big hair gap in. We probably could.
We could have set it at
which
12
is crazy,
the back end of
but and probably wouldn't have performed like the software would have simulated. But we did push to the point where we introduced a lot of aspects, different aspects that are going with performance. So this is for me, this is really important, because at the end, what you want is the people that design and build and live in have the best income from their building, and for a long term.
Yeah. We have been told by industry colleagues at events and things that this is possibly the first 10-star house in Australia to go to this next level and like push the boundaries of that 10-star rating and take in some of this passive house, you know, theory in terms of thermal bridging and air tightness, and dealing with people on site as well. Can you describe, as a woman working in the construction industry, where you'd like to see the industry in terms of inclusive practices and collaboration between the sexes? You might be able to find a recent example on the 10-star house where you've seen that it's worked really well, and maybe could use that as an example.
Yeah. Well, in a general way, I do think men and women are complementary. Like, really, we have different qualities, we've got different way of thinking and way of solving problems. And I think the building industry actually can benefit from the complementary aspect of that. So for me, there is no contradiction in between being a woman and being in the building industry, because I feel that as a woman, we actually bring a new dimension and some quality to the process. And that's probably the case in many different work. So there is this misconception about what the construction industry could be like a man place, and I do think that is a really backward view of it. And yeah, so I do believe, for example, when it's about dealing with site and communication, women has this way of forecasting things and being quite I mean, this is our quality and our default in the same time. We overthink things, but I wouldn't say overthink, we super think things. I don't know how to say that. We see things coming before they come sometimes, and we can prevent about it. This is about caring, this is about saying, well, this is what could happen here. Can we make sure that it doesn't happen this way, so everyone and everything is okay, And so we do that naturally as a woman, I think. And
the risk analysis.
Yes, risk analysis and care, really. It's about caring. So I think it's really good that we could take that to the site in the design process, in the preparation of the site. I think it's really important, and also because the communication is also really important, and the education is really important. I think women has a big role to play on in the construction. They bring something new. Now it's not easy all the time. Huh? It's not easy because you have to pass this old perception of what women should do or not, and how men should behave on site or not. but I have to say I've been quite positively surprised with what happened on the 10 star, because I dealt with difficulties too in France, you know, and the way it is like if you manage to have this really respectful relation with people, and then you can bring this difference as a positive aspect, it's just amazing. I like it. And I love working with men, to be honest, because they bring to me, and they give me this sense of workship and mate attitude that is actually really refreshing as a woman to go with, and help you also to question your ways. So it's beneficial to everyone, I do think.
And it's been wonderful watching the relationship grow, the professional relationship grow between yourself and Mick and Leon and the other builders and things that we work with. That real level of respect and trust as well.
Yeah, so mostly it's happened really well with all the trade on site, and especially was good with site supervisor and carpenters and a lot of trade actually, and that was I think that what was really good is like with this relation between us growing, there were a real sense of responsibility and real sense of ownership with the house. Like everyone, you could feel this interest growing in what we were doing, and people feeling that they are part of it and that they make a difference. And so that was, it's still really overwhelming when I contact. Yeah.
So in terms of your work on the Adelaide's first 10-star home and the important objectives that we had from the beginning, which was to aid the education, the opportunity for community to actually access information and the better construction methodology. Can you describe in your own opinion what it's like to have been involved in the project, what outcomes you wish personally to achieve?
Personally, I mean, I don't know. It's for me. It's just the best way. I mean, I feel like I've been involved in an important project for the community, and I've been given the opportunity to work with people here with a lot of good intention and motivation. So that's already a huge thing for me, you know, just to feel that also that there were some trust and some support in the way I work, and also a lot of input, a lot of people. I learned a lot from this project about Australian way to build, and there were some really good income in terms of a strategy and marketing, and in terms of I don't know how to say that, human relation and stuff like that. And so in terms of why also understand better how the Australian construction industry is working, and there is also some really interesting aspect in it, and the design. And so I don't know, it's for me in terms of personal aspect, just the journey by itself, it's a big win. And now from what the 10 star will be given, I'm really curious to see what will be the performance out of the monitoring. And so as well as I was really excited about doing blower door testing on it, I was jumping everywhere. There is this sense of achieving something that is demonstrative and then can lead people into doing things better. We also did some mistakes. We also had some hard times with this building, and that is probably where I learned the most and what is more beneficial in my career. Is like to understand where you can actually readjust the way you do things to be able to benefit for the next building. And I think that's for an industry, having the opportunity to do a pilot project like that is so much in terms of progressing and learning and readjusting the way you work. I mean, this is great opportunity. So for me, it's like I'm proud of having been part of this project. I'm thankful too, because I do think that at the end would be me or another person, there will be something happening. It's the way things are now, and people, and the transition is happening now in the industry. So being part of it, it's like it's a gift, and having worked with the team too, with you, with Sam, with
very strong
crew
team.
from Woolcock. I love it. I think it's great. It's like finding the good people, the right people to work with is lucky. So yeah, I don't know. There is a lot of.
I think next stage of what you have already started doing, and over the next couple of years, I'm sure it's going to keep continuing. Is this, education about the theories behind the project, and doing this public speaking and some webinars that you've been doing to really get that information out there and try to deliver that change in Australia.
Yeah, we see more and more really interesting question rising around the project, and that's a really good sign for us. It's really satisfying to see people really try to understand what it is about, and that there is interest growing and knowledge growing around that. I think the next step will probably be to bring that more into universities and teaching, because there is still a gap, and this happened also in Europe. It took a while before sustainability was taught properly in schools, and the difference in between what happened in the industry and what can be brought directly into the knowledge of the students, so they can be competent quickly on site and understand what's happened when they work. That will probably really be a really good things to do. Is like I would enjoy being able to share that with students and
or even in the primary school workshops that we occasionally do as well, teaching all these beautiful young minds, and they get it. They're so switched on, and they can see the cause and effect, and it's almost like adults forget how to do that. So I think you're right about that. It's just that we preformatted our mind slowly with the idea of what a house is or what a building is and what it is for. When children have this ability to and creativity that bring a lot of a possibility to sustainability in the construction too, and they were really, really good. Like that was amazing. This experience. I don't know what you thought about it, but that was just amazing, because they don't have all these set ideas, That's something we've been speaking with friends in Switzerland about. You just like being able to break this idea of the four walls and windows in the middle, and to slop house, and give children and grow up the idea that living and being in a space is really different. It's really more rich than that. I do think that deeply can change architecture and our perception of living. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for yours.
Well done on everything you've achieved, and the awesome airtightness. Possibly one airtightness test to go once that final electrical penetration is sealed. We'll see what the final result is, but congratulations on everything you've done and being part of that change that is happening in Australia.
Thank you, Ruth, for giving me the opportunity to do it.
We're both in the right time, right place.
Yes, I think so.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. So thank you all for joining. We have enjoyed chatting to Geraldine and finding a little bit more about her, and letting other people know her background and her passion, which is fantastic. Coming up in the next couple of weeks, we'll also be speaking to Carmen Wilson, who is part of the studio team also, and Samuel on their experiences. So please join us again. Once again, this webinar is eligible for the Green Star CPD points, so just follow the instructions in the chat. and email us for the proof of attendance. So thank you very much for joining, and goodbye.